Errol Barrow, Barbados' first Prime Minister, who led the country to independence from Great Britain, was born in Nesfield, St. Lucie on January 21, 1920. In his time, Barrow introduced a number of measures to improve the quality of life and spearheaded the acceleration of industrial and tourism growth, two pillars of the country's economy at that time. Some of his reforms included the creation of the National Insurance Scheme, free secondary school education, and free school meals. Barrow was very much a Caribbean man and pushed for regional integration. As such, he was at the forefront of the establishment of the Caribbean Free Trade Association, CARIFTA. He had what many would consider a prolific political career, which all started in 1951, when he was elected to the Barbados Parliament as a member of the Barbados Labour Party representing the parish of St. George. However, citing differences with the BLP over time, he left and helped to form what is today the Democratic Labour Party. He then became party leader in 1958 and won elections in 1961, being the parliamentary representative for St. John, and served as premier until 1966, when he then led the country to independence. Having secured the country's confidence in him as a leader, he went on to win general elections in 1971, handsomely defeating the BLP 18 seats to 6. However, he went on to lose the following 1976 election, which saw a victory for the Barbados Labour Party with Tom Adams at the helm. It then took 10 years for the DLP to regain the government, when Barrow secured the party's biggest victory to this date, defeating the BLP 24-3. But just 1 year after his victory, Errol Barrow died in office. Barrow wasn't just revered for his political achievements. He touched many lives and was praised for his love of country, his humility, and creating equal opportunity for the disenfranchised. He's called the Father of Independence, even the skipper, but to one person, he was simply a hero. Margaret Knight was the personal secretary to Errol Barrow for several years, and she still reflects on the time they spent together.
First time I ever met Errol Barrow, I was with some friends in what was a place called Goddard's Restaurant, which was upstairs in Broad Street, upstairs opposite C.F. Harrison. And we were sitting there having a couple of drinks, and these three gentlemen walked into the room, and one of them, you know, I kind of looked at, he was very, very impressive, and he had this sort of upright stance. He looked like someone who was in authority. And one of the ladies that I was with knew him. She and her husband knew him. Her husband was not there. It was just three ladies, us. And she knew him. She was friendly with him. So when he saw her, he came over to our table, and she introduced us all. And you know, I don't know, but I just felt so much admiration for this man. He just looked as if he was somebody that is going somewhere. At the time, he was a politician. He was running for, I think it was St. George, but I speak under correction. And I thought to myself, oh boy, I was leaving the island shortly. In fact, that was a little farewell thing they had for me. And I thought, gosh, if I were here in Barbados, he would definitely get my vote. And so then I went off to England, and I was there for a while. And in 1966, it was 66, yeah, independence, when Barbados got their independence, Mr. Barrow, made a point of coming over to London to greet Bajans living in London, living in England. Some had to come from Manchester, and because they had a big function. And I was there with friends of mine. He was a very well-known footballer, Rodney Norville. That was, mind you, this is going back, like I said, to 66. So You wouldn't have known him. And Rodney and his wife, Anne, she was English. And we were just standing around having drinks. And Mr. Barrow came over to Rodney because he knew him well. And then Rodney introduced as well. It was a reintroduction for me. And Mr. Barrow looked at me and he said, "But I know you, I have met you before." And I said, "Yes." He said, "I think it was at Goddard's restaurant." I said, "Yes, it was." And I felt so, well, as the English say, chuffed, because this great man that I admired so much recognized me. I mean, who was I? And so that was the second time that I met him. Then the years rolled on and I lived in England, came back to Barbados in 1970. And I was so impressed with what I saw in the island. I simply could not believe it. You know, places that had been run down, shacks before. There was a condo or apartment or a hotel, restaurants all over the place. I thought, gosh, this man is really something else. And also, what was very noticeable, all the school children, when I left the island in '59, the school children, many of them were barefoot, and they didn't, you know, the clothes looked a little bit shabby. And when I came back in 1970, every school child was wearing shoes and socks, and they were dressed nicely and everything. And I said, well, look at Bim though, really come a long way. And due to one man, Errol Barrow. And anyhow, I started working, and I had to work in many different places, because I joined the Democratic Labour Party in 1976, 77, 76, I think. And when it became known that I was a Dem, this was very outstanding, because not many white Barbadians, and in particular a white Barbadian woman, no, not the Democratic Labour Party, the Barbados Labour Party. I said, no, Democratic Labour Party for me. That's my hero, Errol Barrow. And so when that became known, and I was working in different places, I got victimized. And they would find every excuse under the sun to fire me. And I got fed up with that. I stuck it out for the only place where I worked and I was happy was at Cavalier Garment Factory, which was run by Frank de Silva. Well, Frank was a Dem, strong Dem, and Frank did a lot for that Democratic Labour Party, for which I don't think that it has been really recognized as it should be. So I worked with Frank for a while, but unfortunately Cavalier went under, and it shut down, so I had to then go and find other jobs. Again, the victimization started, so I said, to hell with this. I am going to see Mr. Barrow. He was then in the opposition office. That was 1982, 83, 82, I think. And I went to see him, and I told him, I said, I'm just fed up being victimized. And he said, I said, I know you know lots of people in the business world. I just want you to advise me or help me out, you know, to get a job. And I mean, it doesn't have to be someone who's a Dem, but I think it might be wiser if it was. And I remember distinctly, he sat there in that opposition office, and he had a habit of just, when he was thinking, he would just sort of nibble on his thumb like that, you know, and he did that, and he said, you know, the government is allowing me to have a secretary. I have an assistant, and his assistant was Anderson Morrison, Peanuts Morrison, they called him Peanuts, who at one time was Minister of Agriculture. But he said he cannot do a secretary's job, he can't type, and they've allowed me now to have a secretary. I don't know, the post starts, I think it was, when would it start? August? July or August, anyway. And he said, if you're interested, you know, I could offer you that job. Well, I thought that I had died and gone to the moon. I'm going to be working for this hero of mine. I couldn't believe it. And so he said, well, it doesn't start until next month. I said, that's okay. I'm fine with that. And so I then went to work in the opposition office, and I worked there with him for I was 83, and we had the elections in 86, and we won the elections. So I'm thinking, oh well, that's the end of me now. Again, I'll be looking for a job. I didn't dream for one moment that I would be his secretary as Prime Minister, you know. But he called me a few days after the elections, and he said, I will expect you to be in your office at government headquarters on Monday or whenever it was. There again, I said, Lord, I really am, I have strong faith. And all I could do was go down on my knees and thank God for what he had done for me. And so I then worked in the Prime Minister's office. He was, oh goodness, that man was such a kind man. You know, if he had a friend in St. Philip or say St. Lucie or wherever, and somebody called him and said, Skipper, I got some lobsters for you, he would leave the office and drive to St. Philip or St. Lucie to give his friend lobsters, you know. And more than once my car was down, and he said, Margaret, how are you getting home? I said, by bus. He said, no. And he would drive me home. He might be going in the opposite direction because he lived at Enterprise Road, Enterprise Beach. Those things like that Errol Barrow was known for. And he was a man who could, if he felt just like going for a walk down Baxter's Road or wherever, he would just go. And he was advised once to have a bodyguard and police guarding the government building, government office. And he said, no, this place is not a police state, and it will never be a police state. I do not want any bodyguard, and I do not want any police.
Barrow died on June 1st, 1987. It was the second time a Prime Minister had died while in office. Margaret got the devastating news while vacationing overseas.
In 87, I hadn't had a holiday for the whole time that I was in the opposition office, and so he said to me, well, okay, you can have 4 weeks, you can have a month. So I went up to London. I got 2 children in London, a son and a daughter. So I went up to London, and that was in May 1987. And while I was in London, I was staying at different places with my daughter and sending with my son and with friends and so forth. And I happened to be staying with Judy and Owen Eversley, Owen Eversley was the Deputy High Commissioner, and it was somewhere in northwest London, near Wembley. I know it was near Wembley, but I can't remember the name of the area. And I was staying with them, and then I was leaving on the end. Mr. Barrow died on June the 1st, was it? June the 1st, I think. Anyhow, I was due to go back to Barbados on June the 6th, and they had this little farewell party for me. And so, not at Owen and Judy's house, at somewhere else. And I remember distinctly while I was at this party, which was June the 1st, I just started to feel jittery, nervous and jittery, and not well at all. And I thought, well, I mean, I've only had 2 gin and tonics. That can't make me feel like this, you know. My stomach felt upset. I just felt ill. So I told my hostess, look, I'm going to have to leave a bit early. And I left around 11 p.m, I think. And I went back to where I was staying with Judy and Owen. Judy was home, but Owen was out. And I went up to my bedroom and I shut the door. And about 5 minutes later, there's a knock on the door. Judy said, Margaret, can I come in? I said, sure. And she came in, she said, Margaret, sit down, sit on the bed. And I thought, oh my God, something has happened to one of my children, and she has to bear the news, you know. Anyhow, I sat, and she said, Margaret, Errol has died. I was so spaced out, I didn't even know who she meant by Errol. I couldn't even think straight. I said, Errol who, Judy? She said, Errol Barrow. I said, what do you mean died? He's died? She said, yes, this afternoon. And we just got the news. That was about, I think he had died around 4 o'clock in the afternoon, but anyhow, this was almost midnight when she gave me the news. And she called Owen, who was out at the time, and he came home right away. And the 3 of us never slept for the night. We spent the whole night in the living room. The phone went constantly, people calling him from Barbados and from all about. And Owen was on that phone constantly. And I then decided, well, okay, David, my son David Thompson, he called me too. And he said, well, when are you coming home? I said, well, I was due to come home on the 6th, but he said, no, I think you should come home, get a flight and come home. So I did. And I came back home, I don't know, I think it was on the 3rd or the 4th. Then, of course, there was the funeral and all of that. It was so stressful for me, you know. I simply couldn't believe it. This great man who had done so much for Barbados, and now he's gone.
Barrow wasn't just the consummate politician, but by all accounts, he was a pretty good cut. What are some of your favorite memories of him during that time you worked for him? The ones that stand out.
He would have luncheon parties at Kampala, which was down by Paradise Beach Club, as it was, you know. He owned a house down there, Kampala. And I can distinctly remember him in the kitchen with his apron on, and he's cooking shrimps and lobster or crab or whatever. He loved cooking. And he wrote a cookbook, you know, he and Lee, Kendall Lee, I think his name was, from Trinidad. They wrote a cookbook together, and it was called Privilege. I still have the book. So memories like that, and well, I would say also the times when my car has been down and he's dropped me home You know, those are some good memories of him.
How did you feel, of course, after he died, your son succeeded him?
Well, I mean, it was, oh God, I don't know. It was just so stressful. And I didn't know what would be my position. I didn't know if Mr. Sandiford, because Mr. Sandiford was, he was made Prime Minister then. I didn't know if he would want me or not. But fortunately, he did keep me on. But, you know, I really, really missed the skipper. I really missed him. And yeah, it was a very, very stressful time for me.
Of course, Errol Barrow, he made a lot of remarkable changes to Barbados during that time. What are some of the ones that stood out to you?
Well, one in particular that stands out, I think, was when I came back to Barbados in 1970, having left in 1959. In 1959, you go into Barclays Bank or Royal Bank or whichever, and they're all white faces. The black faces were in the back doing domestic work or messengers or whatever. All the tellers, bank tellers, were all white. When I came back in 1970, the bank tellers were black. So you know, Mr. Barrow said, no, this can't work. Some of the black ones have to come up front. And I mean, he brought education really up to a very high standard, and so therefore there were black young ladies and young men who could do the job. So why were they not there? And he said, no, they have to be there. They got to be bank tellers and accountants, and that was a big change for me, just walking into the bank and seeing black faces up front instead of all white, you know. And that, I mean, after all, Barbados is it's a majority black population, so what were these whites doing up front, you know? And so things like that he changed up. And well, like I said, he really, the economy was booming, and so I could never understand in 1976 why Bajans threw the Democratic Labour Party out and threw out Errol Barrow, who had done so much for the country. I could never understand that.
Did he get any criticism for having a white assistant?
I think he did, but it was kind of hidden from me. I did, but Mr. Barrow was the type of person that he was an action man for sure. I mean, yes, he was a talker too, but behind that talk was action. When you hear the politicians talk today, it's all blabbermouth, no action.
After Barrow died in 1987, he was succeeded by the late former Prime Minister David Thompson in the constituency of St. John, a seat, just like his predecessor, he never lost. Margaret believed that David learned a lot of lessons and values from Barrow.
Well, I would say honesty would be number one, and integrity. And David really had, I think, two heroes. One was Branford Tate, because David was in and out. David was like a son to Branford and Marjorie Tate. He was in and out of their house. And David loved Branford, but he loved Errol Barrow too. And I think that he admired Mr. Barrow because of his integrity, his honesty, and his ability to get things done, not just to talk. He got things done. So,
in this day and age, what are some of the, as you mentioned, values and things that politicians of today can learn from Barrow?
Well, as I said, I would say the honesty and integrity. You know, I mean, some of the politicians are honest and they have integrity. So I think that these values could be copied by the politicians today. But the question is, are they? I don't know.